I'd like people to know that there is a creator to this world who controls absolutely everything and has put all of these systems in place, and that every single aspect of your life is guided and watched. And just like if a person wants to do good to their body, the way that they do good to their body is by going to gym and causing pain to the body. When a person is going through pain and suffering, I really want people to know that it's for their betterment.
Welcome to the Golden LLama Show, where enlightenment is just a podcast away and where spirituality meets laughter. I'm your host, Andy, here to blend spirituality with laughter and give enlightenment a high five. Join me on this cosmic roller coaster and get ready to laugh, learn, and expand your consciousness. Today, today is a real treat. We have a very special guest, Doron Gibor, who is a real spiritual gangster, a real life mystic, and a true expert of the unconscious mind, and a former shaman that specialized in Ayahuasca and San Pedro, who created his own technique called shadow breakthrough. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Why should we believe you?
That's a really good question. Why should you believe me? Besides the fact that when a person hears truth in the form of laws and it sorts out so many things in a person's mind, answers so many questions, and fills in so many blanks that you can just feel that it's the truth. Besides that, I have within my Shadow Breakthrough course about a 98% success rate. So, as we say, the proof is in the pudding. You don't have to believe me. You can just read my hundreds and hundreds of testimonials and very, very happy clients and multiple apprentices around the world, and you can believe them, because while I may be, let's call it, not telling the truth, it's very difficult to look at a whole bunch of people that have changed their lives in the most incredible ways in a sustainable fashion and say that that person is not to be believed. So I hope that answers your question.
Let's assume somebody did went through all those testimonials that, by the way, are underneath this video. How would you explain an unconscious mind to a person and how it impacts our day-to-day life?
The topic of the unconscious mind is incredibly vast. So when I call myself an expert in the unconscious mind, I'm talking specifically within the context of breaking through unconscious blockages, and specifically within the coaching, let's call it the coaching game of achieving goals that up until now have seen or have been unachievable. A certain income level that you cannot achieve, like there's an income ceiling, or a pattern that keeps on happening to a person despite their best efforts and their most solemn promises that it will never happen again. Ultimately, my field of specialization is how do I change the nature of my results? How do I change what seems like luck? How do I grow as a person, and how do I ultimately expand my consciousness? So within that framework, the unconscious mind is where a person's shadow self resides. And I'll say just a little bit about the shadow self. One of the universal laws is called the law of polarity. That means that everything has a negative side to it and a positive side to it, just like a battery. Just like there's night and there's day. There's up and there's down. If you look at a bow and arrow, the archer wants the arrow to fly forward, but his input is not a forward input. In fact, it's the polar opposite. He pulls it in the direction that he doesn't want it to go. And then after a point of release, the expansion or the forward motion happens by itself. Same thing happens with a building, is that if an architect wants a building to be a certain height, then he has to dig foundations that are a certain depth. And I can go on and give example after example, and it'll make sense. The last example I'll give is for those that are old enough to remember cameras before digital cameras. They work in the exact same way that a human being works process-wise. And that is, the photographer would take a film and put it into the camera. And we call that film a negative film, not because it's bad, just because it's the opposite of what the photographer wants. And once this film is inside the camera, the photographer looks at a certain thing that he wants to capture, presses the button, and then there is an exposure of light. This light creates a negative imprint on the film. And then once the film is taken to a developer in a what room? A dark room where there's a lot of shadow, is able to invert the negative into a positive, and that's how we get the pictures before digital cameras. So what happens to a human being is exactly the same. What Carl Jung said, and he's the father of shadow work, is that where I am the most wounded, meaning where I have the deepest negative imprint, I am the most accomplished. And so I deal with the negative imprint. I help people find their own shadow self, which is the part of the, let's call it, it's the aspect of themselves or the self-image of themselves that they don't want to admit exists or that they don't want to look at. There was a movie called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that illustrates this very phenomenon very, very well. That there was this doctor, he was brilliant and kind and creative, and he created this tincture or this serum. And when he drank it, something else would come out. And that is a really good example of what the shadow self is and what we do in shadow work.
Are you saying that the reason why I'm not achieving my goals is because that guy in the mirror, and that people have this darkness within them, or like unconscious blocks that once they confront, they will be released? And through that release of energy, that energy can become something different, something that is beneficial.
In a yes or a no, yes, but I'll be more specific. Most people have heard of the law of attraction, which is actually not a law, because there's polar attraction where negative and positive come together, and then there is resonant attraction where negative and negative come together and positive come together. So it can't be a law if there's two different types of attraction. But this phenomenon called attraction, it works on vibration. And in order to have a certain experience, the person has to get into the vibration of that experience. How do you do that? There's lots of ways of going about it. Joe Dispenza says you have to see it in the quantum field enough times for there to be an observer in order for quantum mechanics to kick in, meaning to see it enough times so that it turns from a wave, which is potential, into a particle, which is manifested. But ultimately, just speaking on a very high level, a person needs to get into the frequency of the vibration of the experience that they want through gratitude, through visualization, through other things. And then once you're in that vibration, this law will connect you to that experience. It's actually resonant attraction. So as long as you are resonating in the vibration of the experience that you want, then you will attract it. However, when a person has a certain blockage, meaning that that whole attraction thing works great almost all the time, except in that specific area there and that specific area there. And again, speaking on a very high level without going into details, there are 3 areas where there are blockages, and that would be personal income, chronic health, and intimate relationships. But a pattern could be anything that seems to be on repeat. So it's not just those 3 areas. So what happens is that when a person is not able to get into the vibration of what it is that they want to manifest, something inside of them is keeping them out of that frequency, almost like a signal jammer. You know, when people have a cell phone, it works on frequencies. And when there's a signal jammer, the signal jammer will keep the frequency of the phone out of the frequency of the tower, I think it's called. But basically, there will be a mismatch between the 2 frequencies. And so what happens in the shadow is that there is a lot of pain from childhood. And this pain sounds like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable. And there's many, many, many of them. They're called shadow beliefs. These shadow beliefs are actually folders with a lot of pain from the past, from childhood, through teens. And this suppressed pain is full of shame. And the ego and the psyche will do anything not to feel shame. So what happens is that by revealing this shame, the suppressed pocket of pain, it could also be sadness, it could also be anxiety. For everyone, it's slightly different. It can be anxiety, it could be shame, it could be anger, it could be panic, it could be depression, it could be sadness. There could be a lot of things, whatever is suppressed for the individual. Once a person becomes aware of this shadow self, because, and I say they need to become aware of it because there is an inbuilt unconscious denial of all of this. I call it emotional photosynthesis, that things gravitate towards the light. And also in my own mind, I gravitate towards my light self and I justify my position instead of looking inwards to see where is the pain emanating from. When this pain is acknowledged and purged, and when a person can reconcile the part of themselves that is polar to their own self-image, meaning their shadow self-image, amazing, amazing things happen because that frequency is no longer jammed, it's no longer blocked. And a person reaches that frequency, which also means higher self-value, which also means higher vibration, which also means higher consciousness, expanded consciousness. And that vibration or that new frequency is met effortlessly just by nature of my own self-acceptance. And once that happens, those elusive goals, they manifest organically, just like everything else in your life that is not subject to a blockage. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It seems that we need to sacrifice a lot to become the person we dream to become. And we need to make space for the new things in life that we want to manifest. How did you find this? And what it took to understand this on such a deep level?
How did I find it? My own blockages. I had a blockage in the area of money, and I was simply unable to make almost any money. And I tried, and I tried, and I tried, and I tried. And the thing is that with an unconscious blockage, it doesn't matter how much you try because the breakthrough is not the result of a greater effort, but rather the result of a healing process. And so I delved into my own shadow in order to find out, why does my life look the way it is? Why does a person like me that had potential really not even utilizing a fraction of that potential? I felt trapped, and I felt cursed, and I felt plagued by bad luck. And it's debilitating because it makes no sense. The blockage makes no sense. When a person has a money block, this is usually people that are very, very motivated and very capable. It makes no sense why they can't make a success of themselves financially. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a low income ceiling. It could also be a higher income ceiling, but it's an inability to get past that income ceiling. And the same thing happens with the chronic health and the relationship issue, that these people, it makes no sense that they're subject to that blockage and that they're sort of suffering that inhibited reality. So I became aware of the subject of shadow in a men's organization called the Mankind Project that I joined in 2008, I believe it was. And there I got exposed to this topic of shadow. And I stayed with the organization for 6 years, really learning a lot about the facilitation and about a form of healing called emotional process work, which has to be facilitated. Very powerful, but it's very simple, but very powerful. But then when I started drinking ayahuasca, things started changing. I started receiving a lot of information, like a lot of downloads. Not immediately. Initially, I was drinking for my own self-development, but then very soon I met a shaman who, when we spoke, explained to me that my approach for coaching and my philosophy of universal laws and masculine and feminine, positive and negative, he said is exactly the same way that he prepares his medicine, and offered if we should do something together. And we did, and it worked really, really well. So what started becoming my reality was that I was running retreats with a shaman, getting paid to drink medicine. And it just became this routine. And after about 25, maybe 28, maybe even 30 ceremonies, the vomiting stopped, the nausea stopped. I would go into the States and just think about the laws and about the integration sessions that I was giving on these retreats. And I would literally receive information that much, much later, I can see that it was a whole new form of coaching that I call breakthrough matrix coaching, through which the understanding of which allows me to do shadow breakthrough. And that's how I basically got into it. They say that your mess is your message. And once you clean up your mess, then you may have something to teach other people.
So this was a long journey for you. Would you recommend to everyone to do this long cycle of ayahuasca so they can shred layers of their mind?
That's a really good question. And once upon a time, the answer to that was yes. Today, it's not a yes for everybody. So what I will say is that if a person feels very drawn and feels a calling to drink medicine, then they should. It's very important to prepare correctly, to engage with the right facilitator in the right set, in the right setting. And it's super important to have the right integration, which is probably the most lacking thing in the medicine world, is the post-medicine integration. I have a free integration training for post-medicine experiences on my website that anyone can look at, because I want to give that world what I believe it needs so badly. So if a person feels a calling and they do it right, then yes, those people should definitely drink. If a person does not feel the calling, then I know today that while ayahuasca is a very, very powerful tool, it's not for everyone. Not only is it not for everyone, there are many people that have come to me after many ceremonies with problems that have not gone away and problems that have not been solved. And I've had to help them through these problems, not with medicine.
Why do you think that happened?
The answer to that is I don't know.
Mm,
But what I do know is this: just like the archer puts the arrow through a negative tension and only lets go of the string once there's enough negative force, negative tension to propel the arrow to where it needs to get to. In the same way, a human being will go through their suffering, through their contraction. And on a spiritual level, whoever's applying the pressure, whether it's the creator, whether it's the universe, whether it's the soul, whoever's applying the pressure on the individual through suffering, through pain, until there is enough of that negative tension to propel the individual to where they need to be in life, in the future, in their own path, just like the arrow needs a certain amount of tension to reach a certain height, so too that the individual will not find the solution to their problems until there is enough negative tension, enough contraction built up
mm,
in order to propel the individual to where they need to be in their life. And so I've seen this many times that people have come to me and I've offered them the help that I believe they need, and they have not taken it. There's even been people that I've said, I'll help you for free. And they have not taken it because they weren't through their contraction. Once they're through their contraction, their suffering will end. And it won't be for 1 second longer than it needs to be. And that will be through the right person, the right trainer, the right coach, the right facilitator, a realization, the right meditation, the right medicine, whatever is going to be the thing that changes the dynamic from negative tension to
mm,
positive expansion, whatever's going to be that point of
mm.
release, the person will find what they need in their own journey.
Are you saying that we need to experience pain to the level that we can no longer ignore and we need to confront?
I'm saying that in this world that we live in, contractions not only precede the expansions, but the contraction creates the expansion. A very desensitized term to illustrate what I've just said, that no longer means anything to anyone really, is no pain, no gain. And in fact, if I say that exact sentence to the wrong people, I get accused of being archaic. But the truth of the matter is that there is no expansion without a contraction. And pain is part of this life, one way or another. So I know that sounds cruel, but you cannot jump without bending your knees, and the arrow cannot fly without something propelling it.
Or you cannot only inhale without exhaling. So let's say someone wants to clean up their unconsciousness so they can experience the glory that goes with it, but they are not ready to do the herbal medicine. What advice would you give them?
So first of all, it's not really cleaning out the unconscious. Shadow means unconscious, and the only way that we eliminate shadow is through light. So shadow gets formed from an obstruction of light. And so we eliminate shadow, meaning non-self-awareness, through light, which is awareness. So how would I advise a person to go about it without drinking medicine? That's a really good question. Obviously, I would say you can come work with me or watch my stuff, but I'm not the only shadow worker out there. So I would definitely do some form of self-inquiry. Definitely inner child work is probably the most important type of healing that there is. It's a very good question. I'd like to say to everyone, come work with me, but I'm not for everyone.
How can one know what emotion they are struggling with the most?
Very good question. As I said before, one of the designs of this world is photosynthesis, which means that things gravitate towards the light. And the same gravitation towards the light happens within a person's psyche. And so when a person is feeling a frustration or anger or even sadness or depression, there are layers to emotions. And so what I would advise a person to do is to look for the layer that feels like shame. So underneath frustration, there may be sadness and fear, but underneath all of that, there's a shame. And in the shame, when a person has the courage and the quietness to actually look and feel it, the shame is a very unique emotion because it's got a message. And that message is a shadow belief. So if a person listens to their shame, they'll hear the shame saying something like, you see, you really are, and then there'll be something harsh. You really are not good enough. You really are a loser. You really are insignificant, or whatever it is. Now, that shadow belief is simply the negative polarity to which there is a positive polarity. So a person that has a shadow belief, for instance, of like, I'm an idiot or I'm stupid, is usually, as an adult, a very, 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 very clever person. All bodybuilders are walking around with a shadow belief of I'm weak, because that's what's propelling them to become very, very strong. It's the law of polarity. So if a person has the fortitude and the insights and the patience, and I suppose also the courage to go into the pain the same way that Wim Hof tells people to go into the ice bath and sit there and listen to the shame, the person can say to the child, I accept you anyway, to their own self. Even though I have this belief that I'm not good enough, I accept you anyway. I love me anyway, with the belief, because what's happening on an unconscious level is that the person says to their own self, their own inner child, not knowing that it's there, they're saying, when you no longer stink of I'm not good enough, then I'll accept you. How that manifests, how a person says that in their own mind, when I have X, Y, Z in my life, then I'll start to live my life properly. When I have a certain type of income or a body or I'm out of the situation that I'm in, then I'll start to plan my life. I'll start to live my life. I'll start to do things. Then I'll be okay. And it usually feels like, yeah, it's just 4 months away. It's just 5 months away. It's just 6 months away. It's like, it's just around the corner. So when that thing happens, then I'll start to feel good about myself. Then I'll live my life. Then I'll go on picnics. Then I'll go on walks. Then I'll start that course. Then I'll start that degree. Then I'll read that book. It's called the carrot and stick illusion. When I have my carrot that's at the end of the stick, then I'll feel happy and good about myself. But every time I take a step forward, the carrot takes a step forward as well. So what's really going on, like I said before, is that the person's actually saying to their own inner child, when you no longer stink of I'm not worthy, or when you no longer stink of I'm not good enough, that's when I'll give you a hug, because right now, to hug you when you stink, I can't do it. I've got like get away from me. And in shadow work, we almost force that embrace. Yeah, we almost force the embrace. And what happens is that when there's an embrace between the adult I and the child self, do you know what gets shorter and smaller in the embrace? The distance between the I and the self, which is the famous void, the emptiness where all addictions stem from. Because every time a person has an addiction, it doesn't matter what the addiction is, whether it's substance, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex, whether it's money, whether it's compliments, whether it's people pleasing. All of that unhealthy addiction is in order to fill the void. And when I can get closer to my own self and love and accept myself as I am, despite the fact that I'm not living according to my own ego, the life that I should be living, that embrace of the adult I and the child self is so powerful that it changes everything. Breakthrough.
What is on the other side of shame? And if we embrace that, would that allow the issues to be dissolved?
So your question has two parts. What's on the other side of shame? Nothing. It's the ego death. It's the bottom of the barrel. Shame is at the bottom. There's nothing beyond the shame. And the shame only goes away through self-acceptance and compassion. If I've done something and I'm really ashamed of it to someone else, let's say, and I go to the person and I tell them what I've done and that I'm really ashamed and I apologize deeply, and then I get forgiven, the shame slowly begins to dissipate. It doesn't go away immediately, but it slowly begins to dissipate until I can feel proud about myself for doing the right thing. And the same thing happens on the inside. Is that shame is the signal jammer. That shame is what's blocking me from achieving what I want to achieve. It's keeping me in my current bandwidth where I currently am, and everything that I want is in my next bandwidth.
Wouldn't that mean that compassion is on the other side of shame? As, for example, there is fear, there is bravery, and I'm referring to the duality of life, because there needs to be something on the other side. If you go deep enough to shame, what will you find? What emotion that could be?
I don't quite understand the question. If you could ask it again, just explain a little bit.
The world is based on duality. If you go deep into the night, you will find the day, as it's how it works, because day fights with night each and every day, and when the day is the most powerful, it gives in willingly to the night. And shame is an emotion as love is, and if you go deep into love, you will find hate. And if you go deep enough into hate, you will find love. This is an issue with a lot of so-called spiritual people, that they go only into the love and light to find hate in the dark. So the question is, if you go deep enough into shame, what emotion will you find on the other spectrum?
Excellent question. I've never, ever been asked that before. So if I had to look at my case studies and my own journey, it's a self-acceptance, which feels like peace. A deep, deep, deep peace.
Like being balanced, centered.
Yes, but it changes everything. So whatever it was that was imbalanced, let's say it was this big and that thick, when you have that peace, when you go into the shame and then deal with it and forgive and have compassion and then experience the peace, the axis becomes much, much bigger, and this balance, it's not just balancing what was there before, it becomes this massive, massive, massive thing with this powerful, powerful balance. And a person becomes super, super sturdy and steadfast.
In traditional Chinese medicine, Emotions like shame, anxiety, worthiness all relate to the spleen, which is about balance and being centered. And I believe that all emotion have their negative and positive traits because it is all based in duality. And spleen positive emotions are fairness and openness. And once you are centered and no longer burdened by what's in the dark, you have space for that is in the light and that what you're searching for. So let me ask you, what would be the next step on this process of embracing the shadow to find the light and to find the new patterns that would benefit us?
Well, what do you think happens when a person eliminates shadow slash non-self-awareness with light and self-awareness? What do you think would happen at the end of that process over a lifetime?
Well, if there is darkness in the room and I turn on the light, everything is illuminated and I can see everything very clearly.
What's that called in terms of consciousness, when there's no more shadow and only light? What's that called?
Awareness.
Enlightenment.
Hmm.
So where we're going with this, I believe that if enough people become more self-aware, if if there's a core nucleus of individuals doing this, not everyone has to do it, just a core nucleus, we will kickstart or hasten the ascension of human consciousness.
Are you saying all of us are connected?
100%.
How can you say such a thing?
One of my latest gifts, it's been just over a year, is that I'm able to connect to a part of consciousness called the superconscious. And the superconscious is basically the collective. So when the soul is in the body, the mind has a duality of consciousness, the yin and the yang of consciousness, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. In the unconscious mind, amongst other things, there is the shadow self. And within the conscious mind, there is a sense of self called the self that in Latin is called the ego. I use that term specifically like that because when I say ego, it conjures up things that people, one of the most misunderstood parts of the human psyche is the ego, the sense of self. But when the soul comes out of the body, it's no longer subject to this duality of mind. Instead, it's part of the collective. It has this singularity of consciousness that is the superconscious. And for the past just over a year, I've been able to connect to the superconscious and actually do remote healing, which I suppose puts me in a category of what would be called energy healers, which is like a bit freaky for me because I never ever considered myself an energy healer. I'm not an empath. I don't feel things that people feel. Every now and again, I get premonitions in my own line of work because I am an expert. So I get these premonitions and I do understand things, and so I can trust my intuition. But I'm definitely not an empath. Definitely not someone that I would have considered myself to be an energy worker. But now, since I've been able to connect to the superconscious, I can heal people remotely. Actually, which again, it's taken me a long time to get used to this reality. But it's the one thing that has had, I mean, I've worked with over 500 people in the past year without advertising it. And the results have been 100% consistent. Some people need one session and other people need a few, but 100% consistency in terms of like it working. So the only way that I can do that is if we are indeed all connected. That is the only way that can happen. And so that's my proof.
Hmm. So what is blocking that connection for the people? And if there is something that is blocking it, is it the ego? And if so, what is it? Can we use it for our benefit? Is it an enemy of us?
What's blocking it, to use your word, is this thing called trust. Trust. And I'll explain what I mean. When a person is walking on the road, they trust that the concrete has underneath it gradients and underneath it whatever the rest is until this bedrock. And so when they take a step, they trust that it can hold their weight. And that's obvious. But let's look at, let's say, a river. If you're trying to cross a river and you're putting your foot on these rocks, you're only going to transfer your weight onto a rock when you trust it. Okay. You can feel that it can handle your weight and it's steady. Then you trust it, and then you transfer your weight onto that rock, and then so on and so forth until you get to the other side. Now, because the unconscious mind, or unconscious means I'm not aware of it, I have no feeling of it. So when a person gets to start working with the unconscious mind, you have to trust that there's enough of an understanding that this works. And the only way that you can do that is by trying something and saying like, oh my gosh, this works. Like for instance, affirmations, written affirmations. There's an art and a science to writing affirmations, but once you get it right, and I'll just tell the listeners already that it has to be framed in the positive and it has to be framed in the present moment. So you can't say, I'm so happy and grateful now that I don't have any debt anymore, because then you're talking about debt. And you can't say, I'm so happy and grateful now that I will be successful, because in 5 years' time, you still will be successful. It has to be done in the present moment. I will give a caveat that if there's a shadow belief negating the affirmation, then it's null and void from the get-go. But when a person is able to do this stuff and see over time that it works, then they develop this trust. Now, the superconscious, again, it's something very similar where you've got to develop this trust. How do you connect to it? It's very simple. Not everybody can stay there, but everyone can do it. And that is by going into a place. If you close your eyes and you drop into your heart and you just go into a place where nothing matters, where you're not a person, you're not an identity, because the field, the quantum field or the zero fields or the superconscious mind, all of that is pure energy. And so in order to enter into that field, what Joe Dispenza calls the quantum field or the zero field, in order to go into that place, you have to go in as pure energy. And what makes a person, what makes the ego, what makes the sense of self, what makes the identity is attachment to things that I really, really care about. I don't want this to happen because of the consequences. I really want this to happen because of what it means to me. So when a person can go into a place, close their eyes, go and drop into your hearts, slow down your brainwave activity through deep breaths to alpha, and then go to a place where nothing matters and you realize that you're just a speck of consciousness, you have access into the field. And then from there, you can communicate with it. You can think of things. And obviously, a person needs to know what they're doing and you need to learn up a little bit about it. But anyone can do it. What I have that not many people do have is that I have a very in-depth understanding of the frameworks of the mind and the unconscious mind. And so I'm able to utilize this part of consciousness through all of my years of experience and just work with it in that manner. Now, to answer your other question, is it a friend or an enemy? I can't imagine someone doing something bad with it. I don't know if it would work if a person wants to do something bad with it, because if I give off something bad, then that is what's going to come back to me. And I've never used it in a negative sense, and I never, ever will. So I can't really say to you it has these negative capacities, because I would never, ever dream. Just even the thought is like foreign to me. I believe that when a person is doing good, then good comes back. You can call that karma if you want. So to access this higher place of consciousness with a negative intention, I actually don't think that a person, unless they're part of the Sith from Star Wars, I don't know if a person could actually do that. And if they could, I don't want to know anything about it. So that's my answer to that.
What about the ego? Is it our friend or enemy? Is it a tool? What is it exactly? And is there anything that we should be aware of it?
Ego is just yourself. When you think of yourself and you say, I like potatoes, who's that I? When you choosing your clothes and you say, I like that shirt, but I don't like that shirt, then who's that I that likes that and doesn't like that? So the ego, the sense of self, really is an enclothement within the conscious minds of the soul, and it becomes the vessel or the vehicle for the soul's expression. So the soul has its own virtues, it has its own traits, but it needs a suit in order to do it. So in terms of roaming this plane, we've got this meat suit. But in terms of how I express myself and how I go about myself and what brings me joy and pleasure and what doesn't bring me joy and pleasure, those are aspects of this thing called the ego. And it can be worked on. It can be carved and designed, and it can be chiseled away like Michelangelo would make a statue. You can improve yourself. You can change your sense of self until you get to who you really, really, really are and what's really, really important for you, where nothing besides these things, these values are so non-negotiable. Then you've gotten to a place of your essence. When you tap into that essence and it is so non-negotiable that it's either I have these things or I don't want to live, then you've gotten to your bare bones essence.
So let me tell you, if someone that is listening likes it as well and it resonates with him, what would be the right way to find you?
I'm quite easy to find. I have a YouTube channel called Breakthrough Matrix Coaching, an Instagram channel as well. I have a website with a lot of free resources called breakthroughmatrix.com. And on that website, there is a lot of free content and free packages. There's also paid for packages. But essentially, that's my website. I also have my personal website called Doron-Yitzchak.com. And I'm pretty easy to find. I can be Googled.
And what is the last bit of information or a tip or this pearl of wisdom that you would like to give to the audience?
Two things. Number one, I'd like people to know that there is a creator to this world who controls absolutely everything and has put all of these systems in place. And that every single aspect of your life is guided and watched. And just like if a person wants to do good to their body, the way that they do good to their body is by going to gym and causing pain to the body. When a person is going through pain and suffering, I really want people to know that it's for their betterment. And while they're in it, it may not seem like that at all. But when it's done, the expansions are 500 times greater than the contraction. When an archer pulls back an arrow, he pulls it back maybe 70 centimeters, but that arrow can fly hundreds of meters. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that just like a person that is navigating in forest, jungle, deserts, the most important thing they have to their disposal is a compass. And the compass essentially does one thing. It shows you where north is. Every single human has within themselves an inbuilt compass with a north, and that north is your own peace. And so when a person is able to start making decisions based on their peace and not based on their logic and desires, when you're able to make your peace the most important thing in your decision-making process, then the nature of your decision-making will change and you'll be a more peaceful person. And peace is a godly state of singularity because you don't have to do anything. You just got to be okay with everything as it is, both the okay and the not okay. And that's it.
Like, stop fighting with yourself, so the universe also will stop fighting you. I love that message. Thank you for being a guest, and thank you all for joining us on this illuminating voyage. If today's episode resonated with you, do not forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And stay connected with us by following us on social media or visiting our website. Thank you so much, and see you in the next episode.